bunch of fanatics wielded sticks and shouted insults, setting on the other riders. Maurice and César Garin got a succession of blows. The older brother, Maurice, was hit in the face with a stone. Soon there was general mayhem. Up with Fauré, down with Garin. Up with Fauré, down with Garin. Kill them, kill them, kill them, they were shouting. Finally, cars arrived and the riders could get going, thanks to pistol shots. The aggressors disappeared into the night. After the stage, Garin said, "I'll win the Tour de France, provided I am not murdered before we get to Paris." Welcome back to the Cycling Iceberg Podcast, everyone. That opening snippet is just extraordinary. Today I'll be covering the 1904 Tour de France, the second edition of the race, and as that short bit from La Fabuleuse Histoire de Cyclisme already tells you, it was quite the edition. After the success of the inaugural Tour de France in 1903, organizing newspaper L'Auto announced that the race would return in 1904. The route was a copy of the first edition, 6 stages with 4 of them exceeding 400 kilometers. The inaugural edition of the Tour de France had been won by Frenchman Maurice Garin, who was the heavy favorite to defend his title. Long before the Tour de France was founded, Garin was already a top cyclist. In 1893, he took his first true professional win, the 24 Hour of Paris, which was held on Champs de Mars, site of the Eiffel Tower. As custom at the time, the riders competed behind a succession of pacers. The event took place in February, and cold caused several riders to drop out of the race. Just 2 riders finished, of which Garin was the first. He completed 701 kilometers, beating his only standing rival by 49 kilometers. Whilst competitors consumed heavy amounts of red wines, Garin chose a more diverse diet. During the race, he consumed 19 liters of hot chocolate, 7 liters of tea, a mixture of champagne and coffee, 2 kilograms of rice, and 8 hard-boiled eggs. It's also said he liked to consume a number of oysters during the races. From 24-hour racing, Garin ventured into what is now known as the conventional road racing, although the distance was still far more extreme. In 1897, he won Paris-Roubaix in a thrilling edition. The last 2 kilometers of the race took place on the velodrome of Roubaix. About that, it's been written, "As the 2 champions appeared, they were greeted by a frenzy of excitement, and everyone was on their feet to acclaim the 2 heroes. It was difficult to recognize them, but Garin was first, followed by the mud-soaked figure of Cordang. Suddenly, to the stupefaction of everyone, Cordang slipped and fell onto the velodrome's cement surface. Garin could not believe his luck, because by the time Cordang was back on his bike, he had lost over 100 meters. There remained 6 laps to cover, 2 miserable kilometers in which to catch Garin. The crowd held its breath as they watched an incredible pursuit match. The bell rang out. 1 lap there remained, just one. 333 meters for Garin, who had a lead of 30 meters on the Batave. A classic victory was within his grasp, but he could almost feel his adversary's breath on his neck. Somehow Garin held on to his lead of 2 meters. 2 little meters for a legendary victory. The stands exploded, and the ovation united the 2 men. Garin exulted under the cheers of the crowds. Cordang cried bitterly tears of disappointment. A year later, Garin won Paris-Roubaix again. Considering he also won the first Tour de France, it's easy to see why he was the heavy favorite. There were just 2 riders considered a modest threat to Garin. That was 1903 runner-up Lucien Pochet and Hippolyte Aucouturier, later nicknamed Le Terrible. The first stage took the riders from Monterjon, Paris to Lyon, over 467 kilometers of French dusty roads. On that day, Aucouturier was immediately knocked out of contention for the overall win. By the 200 kilometer mark, not even halfway through the race, he had lost over an hour already. His day worsened when he crashed, sustaining several injuries to his face. Despite the pain, he continued, covered in blood. Pochet also got off to a poor start. After 100 kilometers, his bike broke down. As mechanical assistance was strictly forbidden, he needed to repair his bike himself. It cost him nearly 10 minutes to do that, and he needed to chase for 100 kilometers to recover this time. Despite the efforts it cost, he eventually managed to rejoin the leading group with Garin. Garin and Pochet dropped the rest of the field in the final part of the stage. They had built a comfortable lead, but as darkness fell, they were attacked by 4 masked men in the car. The assailants zigzagged across the roads, trying to punch the riders and shove them off their bikes. When a jury car appeared on the horizon, the terrorists made a run for it. Garin and Porcher were convinced that the men had been hired by their rivals, although they had no evidence to back this up. They eventually reached Lyon together, with Garin winning the stage. It took Garin 17 hours to complete the stage. Last place finisher Antoine Defollet arrived 19 hours later. It had taken him a day and a half to complete the stage. Only when he arrived, the judges could start handing out penalties. Aucouturier, who lost 2 hours and 30 minutes, was fined for having a rider that wasn't in the race sit in his wheel. Third place finisher Pierre Chevalier was disqualified for enjoying a 45-minute car ride to catch up to the front of the race. 5 other riders were disqualified for similar reasons. The biggest scandal, however, wasn't the disqualification. It was that Garin wasn't disqualified. During the stage, the defending champion had asked an official for food, which was highly illegal. The official, however, didn't want to be responsible for kicking Garin from the race, so he reluctantly gave him food. This news quickly leaked and angered spectators of rivaling riders. The spectators took out their anger during the second stage, which started at midnight. Local hero Antoine Fauré was in the lead on the Col de la République when spectators intervened. They initially let Fauré pass before blocking the road. Blocking the road wasn't a matter of just standing in the way. No, the rebels were ready to fight. They waited for the rest of the riders to arrive and began battering them. Riders were beaten with sticks, stones were thrown, elbows were dealt. The terrorists shouted, "Up with Fauré, down with Garin! Up with Fauré, down with Garin! Kill them! Kill them! Kill them!" The chaos only ended when race officials arrived and fired shots into the air. Garin injured his hands in the fight, but was able to continue. Italian Giovanni Gerbi wasn't that lucky and had to withdraw after being knocked unconscious and suffering several broken fingers. The situation remained dangerous for the rest of the stage. At first, nails and pieces of broken glass were thrown onto the road, causing numerous punctures. Then, a mob of amateur cyclists targeted Garin, injuring his arm. Eventually, the stage was won by Aucouturier. After the stage, Garin told the press, "I feel great. I'll win the Tour de France if I'm not murdered before we get to Paris." Stage 3 proceeded in a similar fashion. The race passed through Nîmes, where a mob angrily awaited the riders once again. These spectators were furious that their local hero, Ferdinand Payan, had been disqualified for drafting in Stage 1. They vented their anger on the remaining riders, particularly Garin. He was a central point of hate because he wasn't disqualified, whereas towns had seen their local hero, some of them who had received funding from local businesses to partake, be disqualified for the same reason. Rocks were thrown as the riders struggled to navigate their roadblocks consisting of burning straw bales. The organizers were better prepared this time and quickly fired a few warning shots into the air. Nobody got injured, although the mob still managed to break Garin's bike. Later in the stage, the road was once again covered with glass and nails, but nobody was injured, thankfully. Aucouturier won the stage again, while Garin maintained his overall lead. By this time, the organizers had learned how to protect the race. They rode along with loaded guns in their cars, making sure the press covered the fact that they would use them if necessary. Further, a mobile police force was created to protect the race. Believe it or not, there were no incidents in the fourth stage. The peace was short-lived. In the fifth stage, spectators again threw nails and glass onto the road, but at least the violent riots were over. After stage 5, Garin led Porcher by a mere 27 seconds. Garin secured his second Tour de France win in the final stage. He got away in the final part with 3 other riders. His margin of victory over Porcher was set at just over 6 minutes. While this would be an easy and comfortable win for modern standards, it stood in striking contrast to 1903 when he had won by over 3 hours. The organizers were pleased with the results, but other riders filed complaints. They had seen the top 4, Garin, Porcher, the other Garin, César, and Aucouturier, using illegal modes of transport during the race. The organizers ignored these complaints. After all, L'Auto was a commercial newspaper using the cycling race to boost sales. Nevertheless, the French Federation opened an investigation. They interviewed numerous witnesses and eventually disqualified 12 riders from the final results. The complete top 4 and all stage winners were scrapped from the results. The official reason as to why a dozen riders were disqualified after the race had ended was never made public. The archives containing conclusive evidence were lost when they were transferred to the south during the Second World War. It likely had to do with the illegal mode of transport. It was frequently mentioned that the top 4 covered parts of the course by train. This account is confirmed by the caretaker of Garin's grave, who heard Garin recount the story later in his life. Garin always maintained that he was the real winner of the race, although he allegedly confessed to a friend that he had cheated. With the top 4 disqualified, Henri Cornet was announced as winner of the Tour. Interestingly, Cornet had also hitchhiked part of the course, but he received just a warning. At 19 years of age, he remains the youngest Tour de France winner ever. After this dramatic tour, organizer Desgrange nearly pulled the plug on the event. He felt that the race had been hijacked by rioters blinded by emotion and solely concerned about their favorite riders. He was also furious about the disqualification of the top 4 riders. Nonetheless, he eventually agreed to continue with the race in 1905, seeing the promotional value to his newspaper. It did, however, lead to changes. To reduce riding at night, where most of the cheating took place, stages were shortened. This is the oldest story in the Iceberg series. It is also the one with which my book will start. I've always been intrigued by the super old history of cycling, the foundational history. The notion that a newspaper creates a cycling race just to have more news to write about to boost its sales has always fascinated me. In modern times, it's almost unimaginable that news sources create their own news simply to drive clicks. Of course, now we have clickbait, but I don't think that's remarkably close to newspapers founding these events simply just to have something to write about. This is also how the format of the Champions League got created. They created their own midweek competition because they needed to fill their papers in the middle of the week, especially the sports papers, when there wasn't all too much going on. And then there is just the race itself, not just the dramaticness of the 1904 edition, but just the racing in general. Absurdly long stages, 17 hours in the saddle, 400 kilometers on bikes that break down. If they break down, you need to do it yourself. At the beginning of this podcast, I told you a bit about the diet of these athletes. That's not a good sporting diet, to say the least. Gravel roads for most of the parts, racing at night. That's a tremendous physical effort that these athletes needed to undergo. And adding to that is just the pure passion that was created so early on. This was the second edition of the race. Cycling had a big first mover advantage. There weren't that many professional sports. Cycling was relatively early to break into the market. There had been some history of popularity of track cycling, also stateside. But the Tour in the second edition had already kind of established itself as a way out for people from villages. Not only was the Tour the only sporting event that could visit these local rural communities in France, there were people from these small villages that saved up. They paid for their trip to Paris, paid the inscription fee, and then raced the Tour. They raced it mainly for the money. That was the driver for a lot of these athletes. They could either work super hard in their village and have a noble job as farmer or blacksmith, but that didn't earn them that much money. The Tour was a unique way out of there. As said, there weren't that many pro sports yet. We just had the first international football matches going on. There were some local competitions being set up, but the first FIFA World Cup wasn't until 1930. By then the Tour had already had nearly 25 editions. So it was really building strong early on, and it engaged the people in an intriguing way. It's fascinating that within 2 editions that become such a big happening that the people were ready to fight. We had hooliganism in the second Tour 1 year after it was founded. And it was really the Tour that lifted cycling in France, because sure, we had those 24-hour races and Paris-Roubaix was a name that some people recognized, but the Tour c'est le Tour at the end of the day. It really established a lot, and I find that part of cycling history to be very interesting, especially once you combine it with the historical context of the time. Good, the Tour de France starts tomorrow. I wish all of you a very pleasant Grand Départ, and we'll return to more modern times for a new story on Sunday. Thank you for listening.